He's called the election process to secure the Republican nomination for president corrupt. But on Tuesday, businessman Donald Trump moved closer to becoming his party's candidate with sweeping victories in 5 states. On the Democratic side, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton added to her commanding lead by defeating Senator Bernie Sanders in 4 out of 5 contests. Later, we'll go in depth with our panel of political analysts about the nominating process and Trump versus Clinton. But we begin in our newsroom with CCTV's Nathan King. And Nathan, Hillary Clinton appears to be on a solid footing here to become the Democratic nominee. Much was made, though, of the Stop Trump movement. After Tuesday's results, has it failed?
Well, and about 3 people don't think either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee of their respective parties, and they are the ones that are running against those candidates, Bernie Sanders, Ted Cruz, and John Kasich. It was an astounding victory for both Republican and Democratic candidates. Hillary Clinton mathematically is basically there. Bernie Sanders, her opponent, is grudgingly talking about affecting the race in terms of ideas, but not about him now becoming the nominee. The big question is how and when will he drop out? On the Republican side, Donald Trump really routed his opponents across the northeast of the United States in margins that even he did not expect, taking some states by 60%. And what does this mean? It means mathematically now he can actually, looks like, get a plurality, a majority of the delegates needed, 1,237, before the Republican convention in July. And that is very important because that means he will win it without having to go to a second ballot. He still needs to win about 50% in every race, but it looks like he's going to.
Now, Donald Trump has been talking a lot, but of course he's short on detail. He did, however, give his first formal policy address on Wednesday. What did he talk about?
And the first policy address was about putting America first. That's his slogan. He basically says that the foreign policy of the United States is in ruins. And there's some basic principles here. Let me read them out to you. He says that the weaknesses in the U.S. is overextended. Its allies are not paying for their fair share. Friends can't depend on us, and rivals no longer respect us. It's basically a message of peace through strength, a plan to take on radical Islam, rebuild the military and economy, foreign policy based on core U.S. interests. He's basically saying no more nation building like we've seen in Iraq and elsewhere. And also he's saying by being strong, the U.S. can actually gain respect, especially with trading rivals like China.
Fixing our relations with China is another important step in really toward creating a even more prosperous period of time. China respects strength, and by letting them take advantage of us economically, which they are doing like never before, we have lost all of their respect. We have a massive trade deficit with China, a deficit that we have to find a way quickly, and I mean quickly, to balance. A strong and smart America is an America that will find a better friend in China.
Well, what China makes of a potential President Donald Trump remains to be seen. Remember, he looks like he's going to get the nomination, but of course, running against Hillary Clinton is the all-important one for him, and that is going to be a race to remember.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CCTV's Nathan King reporting. Joining us now to talk about all of this is Atiba Madian. He heads his own government relations firm. Joanne Bamberger is an attorney and award-winning writer and journalist. Her latest book, Love Her Not, The Hillary Paradox, was #1 on Amazon. Joe Madison is a talk show host on Sirius XM satellite radio. And with us from our newsroom is Leonard Steinhorn, a former speechwriter and the founding editor of Pundit Wire. He teaches history and public communication at American University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Leonard, let me start with you. Donald Trump, as we've just heard, sweeps 5 states. Hillary Clinton takes 4 out of 5, pulling away from her challenger, Bernie Sanders. For the sake of our audience, our foreign audience, who've been looking at a very complex process here, are we now looking at 2 nominees?
Well, if you listen to what each of them had to say after the vote last night, They are pivoting to the general election. They're training their sights on each other. Donald Trump laid out his attack lines on Hillary Clinton. He calls her crooked Hillary. He said she was responsible for a failed foreign policy, said she doesn't know how to create jobs. You can see the lines of attack that he's establishing for the fall campaign. And Hillary Clinton as well goes after Donald Trump on some of his weaknesses, character, women's issues, and his attacks on minorities. So this is going to be a hard-fought and really, tough campaign for both of them.
All right, Joe, Tuesday night was a big night for Donald Trump. If I'd told you a year ago that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee for the Republican Party, you would have said what?
You were crazy. Probably most people would, and I say that affectionately.
No, I know.
But I don't even think Donald Trump would have thought that he would have been the nominee. But the reality is that he has pulled the scab off a lot of things that has been underneath in this country: xenophobia, racism, sexism, and he's appealing to the low-hanging fruit of the Republican Party. There is no ifs, ands, buts about it. Now, the question is, will that play in the general election? I don't think so, to be quite candid. I think when you get in, first of all, there will probably be more Democrats voting in the general election, and certainly more independents. So, but let me tell you, your guest is absolutely right. If you think the primary season is rough, you wait until after Labor Day. It's going to make this look like child's play.
Joanne, let's not go back a year. Let's go back 6 weeks. March 13th. This is what the Chicago Tribune reported. I'm paraphrasing, but in effect, this is what the newspaper said. Hillary Clinton will not be elected president because she is the lone candidate of the establishment in a year of insurgency. Rather brave of someone on the Tribune to say that so emphatically. But does that still hold?
I think it's pretty silly to say that so emphatically, given that to say that the first viable woman candidate to run for president is somehow an establishment candidate is sort of shocking to me. Yes, you have something that can be described perhaps as an insurgency with Bernie Sanders. But when you look at both of them and their voting records, they agree 93% of the time on the issues. On many things, it's really just a question of style. So I think now that we are at this point, not 6 weeks ago, but we're at this point where she is very close to clinching the nomination, you're going to see a really big effort to bring those Bernie Sanders voters in, and I think she's going to really start highlighting what I think Donald Trump tried to make a negative yesterday, and that's the woman card.
When you talk about the establishment here in the United States, aren't Bernie Sanders voters talking about the establishment, about those politicians that live inside the Beltway in Washington, rather than talking about a woman?
I think that's probably right, but then Bernie's part of the establishment as well. He's been an elected official for over 30 years. He's been in the Senate longer than Hillary was in the Senate. He's been in the Congress for a very long time. So, he's part of that as well.
Atiba, I think it would be fair to say that Donald Trump is not the candidate of the Republican Party leadership. But now that he looks like the inevitable nominee, how do they respond to that reality?
Well, just like anything, you've got to circle the wagon and get on board. If he's going to be the nominee, you'll see, if you want to call it the establishment, will come together, they will coalesce, they will support the nominee. Above all, the party wants to win. They want the White House, they want to be able to have full control of both the House and the Senate.
Leonard, there's been a great deal of controversy over this nomination process, the primary process, people who vote in the caucuses, and how candidates in this country are nominated for the highest office in the land. Let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
Nobody should be given delegates, which is a ticket to victory, and it's not a fair ticket. It's a crooked system. It's a system that's rigged, and we're going to go back to the old way. It's called you vote and you win.
So there's Donald Trump making his point there. And you add to that, there was a Reuters Ipsos poll which was released on Wednesday morning, which says half of Americans think that the process to nominate a candidate is rigged. Is this the best way to elect a candidate in the United States?
Well, look, it's a great talking point for Donald Trump because what he can do is basically say that all of these machinations, all of the attempts by Ted Cruz to win over state delegations and potentially deny Donald Trump the nomination either before during the first ballot or afterwards, it's a great talking point for Donald Trump because once again he can say that he's fighting the establishment, he's the one who's speaking on behalf of the average American, and that's really the brand and message of his entire campaign. But look, the rules were established a long, long time ago. In fact, Barack Obama played by those same rules 8 years ago and mastered those rules to the point that he really did put Hillary Clinton away because of such a good ground game. These are political parties. They're not our government. They're not national elections. They're elections within a political party to determine who the nominee would be. And every political party has a right to figure out what those rules are and for all of us to be able to vote within those rules.
You know, the thing that bothers me about this is that the average American probably didn't know how conventions worked in the first place. Let's just be quite candid. I've been to conventions after conventions. You want to talk about undemocratic, you go to a UAW convention or AFL-CIO convention. I served on the board of the NACP for 14 years. They will turn off the microphone if they don't like what you're saying sometimes. Conventions are not a democratic process. And so the reality is that either Donald Trump didn't know the rules before he got in, so he wasn't prepped for them. The reality is that even Bernie Sanders is complaining now about the rules, and he knew the rules before he got into it. This is a situation of again, playing to the low-informed citizen, that they're not insiders, they don't know how conventions work. And like you said, the rules were set long before the campaign started. So once you get into the game, you cannot change the rules in the middle of the game. You can't do it.
Right, but there were complaints where people were taken off the voter rolls in New York. We saw that. There were people who had to wait in long lines. There was no paperwork.
But that's not a convention problem.
No, that's not a convention problem.
And that's not a party problem.
Right.
That is, for someone who registered people with NACP for years, let me tell you, that's a complaint of the voting process. That's on the local level. That's folks who don't understand that, and by the way, most primaries don't get as many voters as this primary generated. And so what happens is that local clerks underestimate sometimes what they need. Now, that's one problem. The other problem is the issue of voter suppression. And when you look at some of these states, this was a deliberate effort to suppress the vote over this whole ID issue, which wasn't a problem prior to 2008.
Now that disproportionately affects African Americans,
Latinos, and elderly people.
What are the parties going to do about that? What's the Democratic Party going to do about that?
Well, the Democratic Party should be all on top of this, but really, to be quite candid, it's now a legal issue. It's being challenged in North Carolina, it's being challenged in states across the country. North Carolina, a federal judge just voted that it wasn't an issue to suppress the vote. It now will end up probably in the Supreme Court.
Well, this is also an important issue with the Supreme Court, as Joe just said, and it's important to keep that in mind because the Supreme Court overturned basically the Voting Rights Act. Right. It took away a lot of the federal government's ability to challenge some of the voter suppression from around the country. So this is why all of these candidates are right now saying, vote for me and you vote for nominees and justices on the Supreme Court who will be setting the law for generations to come.